the reason why, like, I and probably a lot of other white people are afraid to have these conversations is because it is uncomfortable, and we don't
Yeah.
have to go through life being uncomfortable almost ever. Whereas, like you were saying, when every conversation you had to prove your value to people because they don't see it instantly.
Unless you have already accepted responsibility, don't say anything, because otherwise you're just going to agitate us. It's just agitation. It's not contribution.
And it's something that, you know, white folks have to get together and talk to each other about, because this is really a mental thing that you guys need to solve, you know? It's not like Black folks are sitting there causing the issues.
And white people, you know, are very sensitive and fragile around these issues. Even just saying the word racism or using the phrase white privilege can make some people just already feel defensive because they feel that it's a personal attack.
The lack of historical context and education. People don't know what's going on because they don't understand where this is coming from, and they may not feel comfortable approaching the topic or broaching the subject because they don't have the vocabulary to discuss it.
Like, sometimes the way we talk about it still centers white people, because that's just our whole culture in the US, is centering white people in the mainstream.
One thing I've seen when a lot of like non-people of color white people will talk about this is they start their statements with all these disclaimers. They'll be like, no, I'm not Black, and because I'm a man, you know, and I'm guilty of that too. I think I've started a lot of captions and stuff saying, you know, as a white man, or, you know, whatever, as a well-educated, like we love these adjectives to try and protect ourselves from like having to empathize almost.
Let's think about why we're using those disclaimers. What are you protecting yourself from? And I love the way that you put it, giving yourself permission to speak on these issues. I know disclaimers are to protect ourselves. It's not because we need permission to speak. We do have the First Amendment in this country. What would be more useful or helpful for me is that rather than put the disclaimer out there, actually work on the disclaimer. So if you know you're approaching the situation from a white heterosexual male perspective, check yourself. Before you post something on Facebook, before you send the email, before you talk to a person of color or even another white person, check the language and vocabulary you're using and say, wait a minute, am I biased? Is what I'm saying from the perspective of a white heterosexual male, which it will be, and then you have to zoom out and say, what would affect the perspective of not just me, but all white heterosexual males? And is that coloring what I'm saying? So rather than putting the disclaimer out there, let's actually internalize that disclaimer. Clean your messages. Rather than put the disclaimer in front of it and think that gives you license to say whatever you want to say, actually do what I have to do every day as a lawyer. And especially even before I became a lawyer as a person of color, I had to make sure that every email, every text message, every Facebook post, every time I spoke to a white person in power, that I was above reproach, that I had checked myself to make sure that my words were objective, that they were respectful, and that they were not divisive.
And a lot of times, even small acts of anti-racism can feel scary for white people. So practice that in your daily life. You know, if somebody that you know, like your friend or a family member, maybe says something that is overtly racist or makes it obvious that they don't understand the issues that they're talking about, like, engage them in a conversation, call out racism when you hear it.
And I find it so funny that while we're willing to be uncomfortable in the workplace to make some money. We're willing to be uncomfortable in the gym to get that body. We're willing to be uncomfortable in areas of our lives where we think it will benefit us. When we don't see the benefit, we shy away from being uncomfortable. And the sad fact is, without discomfort, there is no growth.
I'm trying to educate myself about what's happening, but what can allies do, and why is it important for everybody to take action now?
Well, here's the thing, is that I feel like a lot of the times when white people want to say something or want to be a part of the conversation, it's because they're coming in with some sort of they're coming in some sort of opposition, right? Or they're trying to play devil's advocate. They're trying to bring up these points, these specific data points to kind of almost kind of question the legitimacy of our anger. The larger issue is that they don't want to accept responsibility. And so I think that there's a reckoning that white people need to have with themselves. Like, only come and join the conversation once you've accepted responsibility and you're just coming to contribute. Like, if you're coming to argue and fight and try and remove some of the blame from white people, or, you know, find a scapegoat, like, it's just, don't bother, because it's stressful. It stresses us out. And it's also hurtful, because here we are going through all this pain. Here we are not only going through the pain of this moment, but also constantly reliving and remembering the pain of our ancestors. And that's another thing I think people don't realize, is there's a deep pain that comes with thinking about what your grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents went through. Just that by itself is so stressful. And then on top of that, having to see what's happening in this world, it's like you're feeling all of it at once. And then you're going to have these people come in and try and like delegitimize how you're feeling. And it's just like, at a certain point, it's just like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't have the capacity. I don't have the strength. I don't have the time to let somebody come in and kind of interfere or make me feel worse than I already feel.
It's important to listen to the narratives and leadership of Black organizers and Black activists right now, and learn as much as we can so that we can take action that's actually going to address, you know, our dire need for prison reform, our dire need for police reform.
Talk to your parents about these issues. Talk to your friends who you know may have different views, because it may not be me who changes their mind, but it may be you.
Find a deeper way to contribute than just tweeting. You know, Netflix tweeted, Twitter tweeted, that's great. But what are you doing with your resources? What are you doing with the human capital that you have? If you have a collective of people that you work with, any collective, especially a company, this should be a topic of conversation in your company.
You can always ask questions. There are a lot of great resources on the internet that are guides for white people in how to participate in things like Black Lives Matter protests.
Once we put forward any sort of police violence legislation, I guarantee you conservatives and police unions are going to come back with twice as hard. So now it's not even as simple as just proposing the legislation. Now you have to fight the people who are going to come after it with everything that they got. Any politician that's behind it is going to be worried about re-election. So in order for us to organize ourselves and fight them, that's just a lot of money and a lot of time. And it's just like, I don't know, it's a lot to ask of people who are already suffering.
So you said you went to the protest in Pittsburgh. I feel like some people would be afraid that if they aren't a person of color, if they're not Black, that they wouldn't be welcomed. I've been to one Black Lives Matter protest before, and I was incredibly welcome. What would you say to people who might not think about protesting, that think that these protests are only for Black Americans?
So even if you don't quite know what to say, or if you've never been to a protest and you feel kind of awkward going, show up, speak out. Like, don't be silent on this issue, because that in and of itself is a choice.
People need to be willing to risk losing comfort, losing sleep, losing time, losing money, something. You have to be willing to give up something, or otherwise it means that you just don't care. And when you continue to tell a group of people that you don't care about them, it is not going to end well.
I see so many news outlets that have shifted the focus from the overwhelmingly peaceful protests to the very few and isolated incidents of vandalism and looting. The focus on looting and vandalism is just a distraction. It is just a scapegoat. It is just a way to make people feel more comfortable about not having this conversation.
So I feel like it's important when people go out and protest, because it makes other people feel more comfortable standing up and doing the same thing.
If you're going to a Black-led protest, just follow the lead of the organizers. Don't start your own chants. Don't start using your own tactics. Really follow their leadership.
It is useless for you to have a conversation with people who already agree with you. You are just feeding on yourself at that point. You're not actually affecting any change by having a conversation with someone who already agrees with you. It is those people who don't agree who need to be having these conversations right now.
It means something to, when the world is burning, that you acknowledge the reason it's burning.
To do so with humility and without getting defensive, even if something makes you feel uncomfortable, and to kind of like welcome those uncomfortable feelings, because that's always an indication of like a potential learning experience. If something's making me feel really defensive and uncomfortable and I don't really want to engage with it, I don't want to like talk about it, that's an indication that I need to like go into it deeper and figure out what's making me feel defensive.
There's just a real big like psychological shift that needs to happen for us to reassess our values and decide like what kind of people we want to be, what kind of country we want to have. And I think that can have massive implications for the rest of the world. We can bring this whole country to a standstill and demand that politicians come up with solutions now. Just like how they had all those emergency meetings to come up with COVID-19 resolutions, like they can do the same thing for this issue if they wanted to. But it would require people prioritizing. And I think sometimes because you don't know how many other people are on the same page, people are scared to take the risk.
The most important thing that I've learned tonight, spending these like 4 hours talking to everybody, has been to listen, to educate myself, and also not to forget about the event, to talk about George Floyd and the others who have been killed recently and the others who are being oppressed on a daily basis, but to also think about, to historicize it, and then also think about what are solutions or how can we take action and move it forward.
White people would have been, if they were in this position, they would have been started a war a long time ago. They'd be starting wars over nothing. So
change can only happen if the people in power are willing to make those decisions. And the people in power are white, and they don't listen to people who look like me. They listen to people who look like you. So that's why it's important for allies to be speaking up right now, because where my voice will not be heard, you can take my message and it will be.
White people are that person that you walk into the club or you walk into a space and you look at them the wrong way and they just get like overly aggressive. As a group. Do you get what I'm saying though? Like just extremely sensitive to any little thing, but nobody else can be sensitive.
That's so true. And I